Good evening. Welcome to Talk Gnosis. Tonight we're being joined by Frater Aschen Chassan, and he's a ceremonial magician, author, and also seminarian in the Apostolic Johannite Church. Welcome, Frater. How are you this evening?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us again.
The author of a book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, which is now available in paperback. Many of us were eagerly awaiting this, and it has come in, so I'm really looking forward to reading this. I love the cover art. It looks amazing.
Can we see that again for our viewers?
We can. It is
that's beautiful.
I have the old copy here, so that was the old version.
And that's beautiful too, but they're both beautiful. So there you go.
Okay, well, why don't we get right into this? For our viewers who have never done any form of angelic work or working with angels, why should one begin working with angels? And what does it mean in one's material life and the spiritual work to be working with angels?
I think the working with angels, especially in the realm of magic, came about in late antiquity when magic was highly suspect, and moving from cultures and basically histories of people who had been dealing with all sorts of spirits, God forms in one form or another, and you had more practitioners actually speaking to various spirits. When that was lesson in Christianity came through and made that rather taboo, magic was never able to be completely stamped out, and there were still many people interested in talking to spirits. And what seemed appropriate, especially along the Catholic lines, was to speak to archangels, these beings directly under God, who carried out his wishes, who were very holy. So, of course, speaking to angels would be completely within the realm of, at least what in their own consciousness would be appropriate for a lot of these people would be doing these things. And it turned out that a lot of the clergy, people who could read, people who had time to actually do these kind of ceremonies to contact the archangels, were usually people that were in the church, and they were ordained. They were of the minor orders or of the kind of lower priest caste. Not all the time. Sometimes they were abbots and other high-ranking officials that were also interested in speaking to spiritual beings, and angels were among the more appropriate ones, and ones they thought they were interested in too, because they had supposedly knowledge and a lot of things that they could teach mankind about the working of creation, about the will of God, about the truth in existence, and that was very fascinating and interesting to some of these people during the classical period.
Okay. Do you think that the way you describe it, it begs a question for me? Do you think that there's a certain form of subterfuge there where they were trying to cover up that interest in spirits, or do you think that in fact they regarded they were connecting with genuine objective entities that were representative of the Christian God?
I think it depended on the magician. I think there were some, even within the denominations and the priestly, caste and the body and everything, some people that may have been interested to speak with demons and other beings because they wanted something, they wanted more power, or things that they probably didn't think that they could ask for angels for these moral reasons and everything. But there were a lot of magicians who were generally just interested in learning from angels, like John Dee and Edward Kelly. From my research and everything, he wasn't interested in talking to demons or any other beings. He wanted to speak to the angels. He wanted to learn from them and learn as much divine knowledge as possible. So that was his goal.
Okay. Now, if a person wanted to start working with angels, what would be the best approach? Should they be going back to the medieval grimoires, or should they be looking at the work of Dee and Kelly, or is it a wiser approach? Are there other approaches?
There's quite a few approaches. If we're talking about ceremonial magic, the Enochian system, of course, dealing with the angels completely through that system, and one that I haven't gotten completely into. But honestly, the only thing I can really speak from experience is my own experience and what I've done personally. And in the beginning, I actually did not have that much interest in angels. It was part of the background I was learning in ceremonial magic, and I was more interested in the Goetia and other grimoires and doing the other work. And the angels were they were there, and I understood some of their correspondences, and I, kind of had this offhand belief that they did exist, especially if other things did exist. But I had never seen one before. I'd never experienced one. And although I'd had a lot of experience with ghosts and paranormal things and all kinds of interesting beings, I couldn't say that I came face to face with an angel. And it's kind of a long story, but my introduction to them was basically a side attempt to become more proficient, more successful in the Lemegeton, in contacting goetic spirits. And I began working with a system called the Ars Almadel, and the Almadel system deals with these kind of zodiac, seasonal, altitude, and also elemental angels is what they're referred to. And through this system, it was my first real success of feeling, experiencing, and seeing an angelic being face to face. It was my first kind of breakthrough of this being's here. I can see it. I can close my eyes and look away. It's still there. I can hear it. It was one of, it was the kind of the proof that I was looking for, that this stuff is real, that it actually works, and that you can actually speak with these beings. So that was the breakthrough for me. And those were some very interesting beings, but were kind of paving the way for me to eventually speak to these archangels and what's known as these planetary archangels of the heavenly spheres of these planetary bodies that kind of have these attributed aspects and titles given to them, which seem to fit. And that's what my book Gateways Through Stone and Circle is about, is my experience going through the system and contacting these beings for the first time. The book was written shortly after my first kind of bout going through all 7 beings. And since then, I've been through several operations and taken another person along for the ride for this last bout, which is what my next book is about.
I've got a question for you, Frater. Is that, I find all this work fascinating that you're doing here. I guess, a concern I may throw out, for some of our viewers is that obviously there has been lots of grimoires, lots of things out for centuries. I mean, there's, all sorts of ancient grimoires one could go through, research, whether we're talking, with the sacred magic of Abramelin, lesser keys and greater keys of Solomon. There's all sorts of work where I think one could find a workable system if one works within those particular perimeters. I guess, my fear is that myself coming from initiatic traditions, primarily Martinism and Elocoan, we are an initiatory system. We are taught certain things and certain particular methods. I also can recognize in some of the grimoires definite blinds that are thrown out there. Do you feel that one should almost encourage those people to be working with angelic forces without a mentor, without a teacher, without an initiatory system, without really knowing what they're sometimes working with? I mean, I have sometimes cautioned my own particular students that, a being may present itself as a being of light, but it's not necessarily a being of light. You really have to be pretty cautious, I think, when you're working with these types of forces. Any particular recommendations you have for the beginner who is, really curious and they want to kind of go to that next level?
I do, and I've been speaking with people on various levels, and it does get to the question does arise, because the question really is, where is a person on their not only spiritual path but their magical path? And when people come to me and they're like, I've never really seen a spirit, I've never had a successful evocation or anything really dynamic happen. I haven't done this and everything, but how can I do this? And for that person, I'm like, well, you really, and I do recommend really starting at a tradition. There's many different traditions where speaking with spiritual beings is an important aspect. And of course, I can't vouch for every single one of these, but I have a firm belief that many of those do work, especially the ones that have been carried on for a long time. It's because we have endured, because there's something there. People have gotten benefit from them enough that they put work into it and carry it on to another person. And if somebody is just starting out and they don't really have a whole set of, because what tradition does, it gives you a roadmap. It gives you a methodology and a way to explore the spiritual world, which when you're kind of going at it, especially from a new agey or kind of random place, it's very chaotic. You don't really have a foundation of how to speak with these beings, of how your mind can interpret what kind of energy is around and that clear way communication. So tradition can definitely do that for people, but it does get confusing because sometimes here in the West, they're not sure which tradition is appropriate from them. And that's kind of how we got to the New Age thing. Everybody wants to take a little bit of something from here or there. And a lot of times it just kind of ends in this big blob of confusion. But, to maintain the integrity of a system and to contact a spiritual being through that system that may be familiar through that system, I think is the way to go. Because you're right. Like, how do you know that you're contacting the correct one? And because there are deceiving beings out there. There's beings that try to appear as one thing and not as something else. If nothing else, the grimoires definitely tell us they have a very, very stringent methodology to question, to bind the spirits through oath, through holy names, and through other creeds to make sure that they're speaking to the proper spirit. And these are all things that myself, through my experiments, that I make sure to write down. I'm actually very, very strict and record everything that comes across, especially now that I'm working, and I have been working with another scryer. If something appears and it appears kind of bizarre and does it match any of the correspondences of what I'm used to for the being, that brings it into question. If it has any trouble swearing that it is, the said name of the spirit, through the Most High God, and these systematic, we work through a Christian-based magical system. So the oaths are through Jesus, through God, and these holy names that we use. And if it has any issues and everything, that's also something to bring up why. Another test is that if it promises it can do something, offer some sort of information, that should be able to be verified. The information should come about and prove to be true. If it's not, that really has to be looked into. If it says it can grant you some sort of ability, that should be granted. If that does not occur, then the being has got to be questioned, or the whole system has got to be questioned. So these are all things that has been very fascinating for me, and I kind of take a approach, especially when I'm conjuring a being for the first time and I don't know this spirit. It's an introduction, so to speak. I keep it open. I have not argued with a spirit yet, but even if something did not quite make sense, or I did not quite believe its full capacity of what it was saying and everything, I go back and I kind of test out what kind of information we gathered from the whole thing. The exciting thing is that things have been lining up ridiculously spot on, and I've been having fun, and especially in my recent experiments, almost more scientifically. I don't tell my scryer what spirit we're conjuring, and when we're in that episode, I got everything set up. He comes in, he only sees the sigil like right before we're getting into the whole mix and everything, and then what comes across is fantastic. He has no idea. He's not a traditionally hermetic trained magician, so these beings are new to him about 100% of the time. And when the information comes across and they hit all the marks, especially when they match up to the grimoires, they match up to biblical references, to historic references, to archaeological references, I get really excited because those are some verifying information, and that's really neat. And more so than that, the results of when we ask for something, whether it be for ourselves or for another person, and that becomes a verified reality, is definitely what we call for what we can say is a successful evocation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one thing about these angels and beings as well, is that it feels like we're scratching the surface. There's so much that they seem to be about, that the translation of themselves, how that comes across during the ceremonies, even though they're sometimes hours long, is still kind of like a small slice of the pie with a full picture, so to speak.
All right. This is fascinating, and I know we're going to continue this in the After Dark episode and probably really get into it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this, because this is some very serious work, and I think it's great that our viewers and listeners are going to have a chance to learn about it. So thank you very much. Now, at the beginning of the show, I did show people a copy of your book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle. Can you just briefly summarize, give a brief summary of what the book's about?
Sure. So I came upon a magical system within the book called the Magus, and it's a part called Drawing Spirits into Crystals. Mm-hmm. Now, I had read through this part before, but I didn't become very interested in it until a magical colleague of mine, Frater Rufus Opus, and everything, had done some work in it as well, and he kind of had his own take on it. And we were doing some work together, and I was like, well, because everybody sees me as a traditionalist, as I am, as my methodology is, if I'm going to work from a grimoire, I'm going to take it as it is, regardless of the transcriptions, variations, its historical kind of legitimacy, as it were, so on and so forth. And I just take the material for what it is, and I try to replicate the experiment as it's written down to the best of my ability, to the best of my comprehension of what it says. And I did this with this art of drawing spirits into crystals, and it's probably one of the least complicated classical magical methods that you can do for contacting spirits. It really has very little lengthy invocations. The equipment is not all that complicated, except for perhaps the scrying implement is a little bit more of the more unique and difficult to make. But besides that, I kind of take it. I didn't know what to expect. I made all the equipment, and I planned to document completely the truth of my findings ahead of time, because my original purpose was just to share my findings with the group and with Rufus, who was part of this group, who I was working with. Mm-hmm. When I began it, and these beings started appearing, and I was getting this information, I got very excited. So I went through the whole system conjuring these 7 archangels, and was getting profound experiences, and it was just amazing. So I had been writing and recording everything down, and I sent kind of an early record and manuscript to another magical colleague of mine who's also an author. And he's like, you should get this published. This is amazing. I haven't quite seen anything quite like this on this, personal take. So why don't you get it published? I was like, okay. I'd never written anything. I'd never considered being an author. I didn't know if I could write well enough where people would enjoy it or find it interesting. I didn't know, but I just decided to go for it. And the more exposure I got, and the more people who reviewed it and helped edit it, I just got positive responses across the board. It was really amazing. Everybody was really supportive of it. And that's the book is how I perceive my ability to speak and talk with the angels, what kind of things are needed for this operation, how to make all of the implements, from the wand, the circle, the altar table, the holy altar, the scrying implements, everything. Mm-hmm. And that's all contained in the book. And then in the very back, I share a brief synopsis of pretty much my first evocation that I ever did of the Archangel of Saturn. And people seem to really, really enjoy that. And so it was just kind of an honest and straightforward approach of how I dove into this subject, how I dove into this experimentation, contacting the angels, how they appeared to me, and kind of what they were about, and how somebody else could do it if they wanted to choose to work from this kind of traditional method of drawing spirits into crystals.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to reading it, and I'm looking forward to hearing from some of our viewers and listeners who have also read it as well. So, again, thank you very much, and thank you for being on the show tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, from our audience, do you incorporate angelic work or ceremonial magic into your spiritual life? If so, what are some of your methods? And if you don't, are you interested in trying any of the methods that Frater Aschen Chassan has discussed here on the show? We'd love to hear from you either on Facebook or on in the comments section under our YouTube video. So I want to thank everybody again for joining us this evening. We're going to be moving on now to recording our After Dark podcast, which should be available Sunday night, Monday morning at some point, so you can hear a more in-depth discussion with Frater Aschen Chassan, and it's going to be, I'm sure, a great conversation.
I'm sure it will be.
So, absolutely. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
All right, thank you.
This has been a production of the Gnostic Wisdom Network. For more information about this and all of GWN's programming, please visit gnosticwisdom.net. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GWN, the Apostolic Johannite Church, or any other organization. This has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License and is brought to you by the generous support of our patrons. To support our programs and become a patron, please visit patreon.com/Gnostic. That's patreon.com/GNOSTIC.